And now, for the next part of our conference, I'm delighted to have in conversation two very special people. The award-winning Orwell Foundation journalist, Ian Birrell, and our very own campaigner, activist, mummy to Callum, trustee to Enable Scotland, and Saltire Woman of the Year, Beth Morrison.
Thank you, Teresa. It's my great pleasure as a trustee of Enable Scotland to welcome Ian Birrell to the Enable Scotland Annual Conference. Ian, along with my colleagues on the board and all at Enable Scotland, we're all huge admirers of your work. We're hugely grateful that you've taken such an interest, and thank you for coming today. We're all really delighted that you could give us some of your time. We know that you're really busy and that you've just come back from the USA where you've been covering the election, and I think that's a whole different conversation for a different day. But thank you very much for coming along today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's an honour to be able to speak with you guys.
Thank you. Enable Scotland's mission is to ensure that every person with a learning disability is supported to live in a community of their choice. And our charity has proven time and time again that this can be achieved for anyone. But the fact remains that across the UK, and I'm sad to say here in Scotland, there are far too many people who are still stuck in hospital or other long-term institutional settings. And quite frankly, as a mum, that breaks my heart. And I know it does yours too. You've uncovered some horrendous situations over the last few years, including cases of seclusion and physical and chemical restraint, and that is a topic which is very close to my own heart. Ian, is there one institution or one person that sticks in your memory, and can you tell us about them?
To be honest, there's lots of them that stick in my memory because I don't think anything I've found as traumatic as covering this, even though I've been in conflict zones and talked to torture victims and everything. To know that within our society, purely due to the lack of care really within the society, that innocent people, children, young adults, older adults are being detained, locked up, secluded, restrained, physically abused, and held in solitary confinement, I find just incredibly disturbing. I've always known about this because my own daughter has special needs, and so I'd heard about it. But it was only really the now famous case of Beth that brought it to home to me, and talking to her family, quite how severe it was. When her father told me, it was like the scene out of Silence of the Lambs when they walked along the room with cells on either side, and his daughter was being held in one. And then you learn about these cells where people are being held and restrained, and children held with no bedding, with no furniture, with no books, no television, and fed on the floor like animals. I just found incredible. But in a way, the case which always really sticks in my head was a very early case I spoke to involving a lady called Adele Green from Bristol. And I'll never forget when she was talking about her son Eddie, and Eddie was a nice, bright, articulate kid. He liked playing practical jokes on his family. He's very energetic and outdoors and sporty. But like a lot of kids, when he hit adolescence, he needed a bit of extra help, and the family understandably trusted the experts and agreed to send him off for theoretical assessment and treatment. And a month later, Adele went to see her son, and he was like a sort of zombie. There was this energetic, articulate young kid who could barely keep his head up and was in such a bad state and had put on weight. But the thing I really remember was Adele saying to me that when she saw him, she said it very quietly, I felt like I'd failed him as a parent. And that really sort of struck home to me. It was sort of heartbreaking that here was this woman who'd struggled all her life to try and look after a kid, had gone to the experts for help, and then had basically been betrayed by the system that was designed to help him, and still now is struggling to save her son. And that was really a moment which really hit home. Since then, there have been lots more in Scotland and England and Wales, all over the country. But and I almost, it's become familiar in a terrible way, hearing these terrible stories of broken families and abused children and abused adults, hearing it from people who've been through the system themselves. There was another case which really strikes home. I went to cover euthanasia in Belgium, and I spoke to this woman in her 20s who had got permission to kill herself legally because she was so stressed. She was so psychologically damaged. And when I spoke to her about the reason, I was chilled when she said it was because she spent 5 years essentially in their equivalent of an ATU and had autism. And to hear that the trauma was so great that the state agreed that this woman was so traumatized that she had the right not to live anymore. How bad is that? And yet we carry on with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking. I too have heard a lot of stories over the years, and my expertise is in children and young people, but it's never easy to listen to that. So, Ian, what do you think it says about the health and social care system that it takes a journalist, albeit a wonderful investigative journalist such as yourself, to expose these failings in the system?
I think, what does it say when we see so much of how society treats people with learning disabilities, stuck at the very fringe, abused in many cases, put in dire housing, not given the care, and in the most extreme cases locked up? It says that we have a society that just does not really care about the people who, look to it for support and help and assistance. People who have so much to offer society, have so much to offer families and communities. But instead, it's like there's this 19th century attitude towards them where they're locked up. But what I find almost more disturbing isn't just that they're locked up, but the fact that even when we know about this, it carries on. We know that hundreds and hundreds of people are being locked up and being abused and being detained and being sedated and being physically held down by gang adults. And yet it carries on. Nothing happens. It's cheaper to treat people with dignity and decency. It's cheaper to give them proper support in the community. And yet we're allowing this to go on. And in some cases, we're allowing private profiteers to make absolute fortunes off the back of it, who have, of course, a vested interest in letting it carry on. But equally, the NHS is far from, it funds it and it commissions it. And in some cases, it also has some of the worst abuse going on under its own wing. So really, what does it say about our society? Not that it takes a journalist, and not just me, other journalists have done it as TV. We've had Walton Hall exposed by Panorama. We had Winterbourne View exposed by Panorama. ITV have done stuff. Jane McGubbin on BBC Breakfast Television has done great stuff. There's other journalists have written about it. What does it take that we know about this, that it's exposed, and yet it carries on, and that there's not this massive outcry, and that politicians are not forced into action?
Absolutely. I think I've said over the years myself, where is the outrage? Because there doesn't seem to be any. And so why do you think, Ian, that time and time again, we don't seem to see any real action or consequences? I mean, what do you think it'll take to end this once and for all our people with learning disabilities, our loved ones, our families, our children? What do you think it's going to take?
I wish I knew the answer. I'm ended up quite depressed at the end of all this by the fact that there's been so much attention on it, and it has been picked up, and it's been in a, credit to the Mail on Sunday and to the I newspaper for both letting me hammer away at it, credit to broadcasters for doing great stuff on it, and yet it still carries on. And it does make me worry that it'll just carry on. I think there's the tragedy of social care in this country at its widest level, whether for elderly people with dementia or children with needing support, whether due to learning disabilities. And also, let's not forget this goes into the mental health system as well, which also operates a system based on incarceration rather than community support. I just find it terrifying that it carries on and that nothing happens. But I think ultimately people don't really care about care. because it's only old people, or it's only disabled people, or it's only people with learning disabilities. And then, of course, they only care when it hits them with their mother, their sister, their brother, themselves. And then they realise quite how appalling the system is in this country. Today we've had the spending review. I saw date figures for how much money is poured into the NHS. 6 billion extra for the NHS. I think it's gone up in a decade from something like, I can't remember the figures, but a huge amount. Social care actually fell over that period and has got 300 million. It's even after the pandemic, even now, even after all we know, even after we've seen the deaths of people with learning disabilities 6 times the rate of other people in the pandemic, the deaths of old people, the terrible way the staff are treated, some great staff are treated, basically, by a lot of the owners and the operators, paid a pittance. Even now, nothing's happening. So I wish I had the answer. I wish I could flick a switch, but I just fear that as a society, at the end of the day, we don't care about the people who most need our support.
I have to agree.
Equally, I should add, actually, that is why the work of families and of groups and those who do care is so important. And of course, let's not get too pessimistic. There are some fantastic organisations, some fantastic people, some really committed people, and I've been privileged to meet people who have come into this, whether lawyers or carers or social workers or activists or whatever, who are just mind-blowing in their dedication to try and fight this system and try. So, there are some fantastic people out there, and there are some great examples of fantastic care. We should never forget that as well. It's just a shame there's so much terrible care.
So, Ian, finally, the Scottish Government has recently commissioned an independent review of adult social care, which will include delayed discharge and the provision of care for all people who have a learning disability. What do you think is the key thing that the Scottish Government should do to end the practice of people being locked away and being denied their rights to a home and a life of their own?
One thing that really interests me was when I was in Italy, in Trieste, which led a in psychiatric care, and they actually led to Italy banning psychiatric hospitals. And it's really inspirational to see the sorts of things they do. And they explained to me that one of the things they have, if in extreme cases someone does have to have some kind of system of sectioning or anything like that, it has to be renewed every week. And I thought that's an interesting idea, that if you had to renew it every week, if everything had to be public, then that's not a bad thing. But ultimately, I just think everything should be determined from the bottom up. And I think that users of services and their families should be empowered to totally determine what sort of care they get. And I think there's too much power with the bureaucracy, with the commissioners and people like this. And we know that, I suspect if there's a lot of parents watching this, then a lot of them, I'm sure, have had problems where they've been accused of being too pushy, or not really looking after their people's best interests. Ultimately, parents and families and users are fighting for the best services. They know what's best, so it's a matter of trust. And I think politicians and paymasters need to get over the hurdle and just trust people who are using services. And also to trust, we talk a lot about whistleblowers. Whistleblowers get crushed in the system. We know that time and time again. Genuinely empower a system whereby anyone can raise a complaint at any time, at whatever level, and it's taken seriously. The aviation industry has that, because if they don't deal with safety, planes crash and people are killed and companies are wiped out. Why can't the care system, which has human beings at its heart, put human beings at the heart and trust?
Absolutely right. Ian, it's been such an honour to talk to you. On behalf of all of us at Enable Scotland, I'd like to formally thank you for all the fantastic work that you've done, and I'm no doubt that you will continue to do. I can hear that passion, feel that passion. And, just keep doing what you're doing to expose the persistent abuse of the human rights of people that are vulnerable with learning disabilities throughout the UK. And I'd love to present you with an honorary membership, lifetime membership for Enable Scotland. And just like to say welcome to the Enable family. It's lovely to have you.
Well, that's very kind. As someone with a Scottish background who was at Aberdeen University and is married to someone from Mallaig, and indeed my daughter is called after a Scottish island, and my son has a very common Scottish name. So very honoured, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Great discussion. I've loved talking to you. Thank you. Teresa, over to you.